Hello everyone, this is Observer Tribe 12, and welcome to a new segment that I like to call Hey Can We Talk? This is going to be a section where I pick up topics, or you guys suggest them to me in the comments, and I talk about it, as the title pretty much suggests. Just want to give you guys a quick warning that this episode of Hey Can We Talk may contain some mature content, so viewer discretion is advised. For today's episode of Hey Can We Talk, we will be discussing a creepypasta OC named Velmer. She's created by a DeviantArt artist who goes by the screen name Velmer-EXE, and at first glance we can see that she's pretty much made in MS Paint. That's very obviously a base. You can see the base on screen too. Yeah, I'm not gonna judge this one solely on the art, since maybe it didn't have any other art tools, maybe MS Paint was all they had, and I don't really have too much problems with bases as long as you credit them. So, what's bad about this OC? We're gonna talk about that. But first, we should know her backstory. Let's get a little bit of info on Velmer. It says here that Velmer is age 18, female, and her species is vampire demon killer princess. I'm not gonna touch that yet, but I will definitely go back to it. Let's read her story, shall we? Velmer was eating fried chicken at KFC when the school bullies came in with their knives and threatened me. Then, Velmer got beat up and went home. Her mom yelled at her while her dad watched the TV. Velmer yelled at her mom, and the dad came and punched her and sent her to her room. Velmer's brother, Fred, comforted her while she cried. Velmer went to sleep, wanting to kill her dad. The next day, Velmer met Jeff and they fell in love. Then the girls came and tried to stab Velmer, but she was too fast. She killed the bullies with a chair and suffocated the other with the bag, then ran home, took a knife, stabbed her dad in the throat and said, "Go to bed!" Then she ran out into the rain to Jeff, and her and Jeff kissed and went into the forest. "Jeff, I killed my dad. What do I do now?" said Velmer, holding Jeff's hand. "Now, my dark princess, we can live together forever," said Jeff, staring into her eyes. "Oh, Jeff, I love you," says Velmer, crying. She hugs Jeff and cries into his shoulder. "I love you too, Velmer." Okay, there's clearly a lot to be talked about, so let's take this one step at a time. Let's start with some of the plot points. Your bullies. First off, it's getting to be a very overused cliche to have your character be bullied at school, but what I'm more worried about is that your bullies were one-dimensional and not really fleshed out. They didn't even get names. Why was she bullied? What did they dislike her for? And yeah, why? Just why? People are not bullied for no reason. When you go to a school, there's always a reason for somebody to be bullying such and such person. You cannot go in there and just have mindless bullying for no reason. Were they jealous of her? Did she do something to antagonize one of them? Why is she the bully victim? Now, I've mentioned that the bullying is cliche, and this is not the only cliche that you've used here. Right now, you have the abusive household cliche, and you see that in pretty much every single one of these creepypasta OCs. Is there a reason she was abused at home? What triggered this? Why are her parents like this? Is there a reason behind it? Can you do something different with it? Or did you just use it because every other creepypasta OC seems to have that in the formula? We need more detail. Also, you had a cool setup with her being a vampire demon killer princess. You could have worked that in there to make it a little more unique, and I'll get into that in more depth later. Let's talk about her motivations. Her motivations are very weak. She gets bullied at school and abused at home, and that somehow leads her to be a murderer without any sort of trigger. You need something to push her over the edge. You need that trigger point. like some sort of tragic or traumatic event that finally pushes her past her breaking point. What gives her that push to go back into that descent of madness and become the psychopathic killer that you're trying to portray? We need to know what that triggering point was. But enough about the sad stuff, let's talk about romance. Like how the Jeff romance was kind of shoehorned in and kind of lazily handled. So, I'm trying to understand what happened here. Did they just meet in one day and then just fell in love instantly? How did that happen? Was he stalking her or did she seek him out? And why didn't Jeff just kill her upon meeting her? Did he know something about her that she didn't? Was he intrigued because he had been watching her for a while? We need a little bit of background there. Otherwise, it just seems like they just bumped into each other in the woods and it's like, I see you, you're a boy, you're a girl, let's get married. And that really only works in early Disney. If you want to get very technical, it could have been removed entirely and wouldn't have affected the story at all. Also, of all the pastas, why Jeff? Jeff is in literally every single OC story where you're trying to pair him up with somebody. Given that she's a vampire demon killer princess, as you said, wouldn't it have made more sense to meet another demon like EJ or Kageko? I mean, Eyeless Jack is already a demon and so is Kageko, so having her meet one of them would have probably made more sense canonically, given the species that you've given your own OC. Just a side note there, nothing that would really have changed anything. The romance was still handled so poorly it could have been removed entirely. But if you were going to do a romance, why not do one that made a little more sense? Going back to the family, let's talk again about how they're abusive and stuff. Your family wasn't really fleshed out. We never really got that family dynamic that we were looking for that would make them relatable. Like, her mom was yelling, but she wanted to kill her dad for one punch? What made the dad so special? Was that one punch really all it was? Was that supposed to be the triggering point? If so, what built up to it? And why wasn't mom's yelling enough to get a target on her back? And what happened to Fred? If he's her rock of sorts, then where was he in the rest of the story? Why didn't he show up again later? Was he not home for the event? Also, why was her mom yelling at her? And why did Dad punch her? What made them become abusive? Once more, I'm posing that question. And do they abuse Fred too? If so, then do Fred and Velmer comfort each other? If so, can you show that on screen a little bit? That way we can see them as relatable siblings? Can we see a little more of the parents to make us want to side with Velmer a little more? Not that you want to side with the killer in any sort of horror writing, that's bad writing, but regardless, you need to flesh out these characters more and tell us more about their dynamics before we can either care or relate to them on any means. You can't make a relatable character by giving us no information about them. In any form of writing, you need to remember, the more details you give, the better off you'll be. So, now that I've discussed her motivations, the minor characters, and several plot points that were wrong, let's get to the story and possibilities, shall we? There's a long list of offenses here, so I hope you're all comfortable. For starters, she committed a murder in what I'm presuming was her school, since I'd imagine that she would be going to school after meeting Jeff. And she killed somebody with a chair. That would make a lot of noise and require her to be somewhere with a chair, like a classroom or an office. That would already gather some witnesses, but then she proceeds to strangle somebody with a bag. I'm presuming since she's at school, she meant a book bag. So unless it was one of those plastic ones mostly used by the younger kids, that probably wouldn't kill anyone too fast. But if it was, it takes at least 70 seconds or 1 minute 10 seconds for those bad at math to strangle somebody to death. So after using that chair, you would have been caught long before you were able to smother your victim. But then she proceeds to run home without getting caught by any witnesses or on any cameras that might have been in that school to get home, grab a knife, overpower her adult father, and stab him to death. I'm sorry, but that's not likely. An average 18-year-old girl cannot overpower an adult male. So, unless she's been lifting some serious weights and really training her guns lately, she's not going to be able to overpower her father and kill him. Sorry. Also, how was she able to really make it home after clubbing somebody to death with a chair anyway? That would get a substantial amount of blood on her, and you're trying to tell me that nobody would have stopped her in the streets on the way home to question if she was hurt or in a fight after seeing her covered in blood? That's also very, very unlikely. Especially since you already stated that she's a princess, therefore everyone would have probably known who she was and probably would have stopped to see if their princess was okay. I mean, she's not exactly just another face on the street, she's your princess. They're gonna recognize her. Now, just because I'm pointing out a lot of things that are wrong with this character doesn't mean this character couldn't have been good. There was a lot of potential here that I really wish had been tapped into. Like this one big point that I'd been picking on all throughout this review so far. You mentioned she was a vampire demon killer princess. You gave us the killer part, sure, but how did she become a vampire or a demon? Is it some sort of mixed lineage? Or is a vampire a type of demon in your story? And if so, how did that come to be? How did she become a vampire? Was she bitten? Was she born a vampire? How did that work out? Also, does she have any abilities that would come into play thanks to her being of supernatural heritage? Like, does she have any increased agility, increased speed, durability, eyesight, strength? What about any weaknesses caused by this? Can she not go outside during the day because she's a vampire? What about emotional weaknesses or character flaws? A character isn't relatable unless we can see them at their best and at their worst. Weaknesses on the part of Velmer would have made the audience more able to connect and relate to her on a personal level, and engage them in her struggles as she declines into madness. What about the princess part? Is she going to some human school or some underworld school for royalty? Does her being a princess affect her daily life at all? What about when she murdered her father, the king? How did that affect the kingdom? Do they have a kingdom? What's going on with that? We need more. Also, what is her breaking point? I know I mentioned earlier that we needed a trigger, but as a character, it needed to be mentioned again. People don't just go insane because a few bad things happen to them. There needs to be a point where things escalated and it finally broke her. What is that point? How did it affect her? How did it come about? Was it an outside effect, or was it brought about by a character's own shortcomings? The more we know, the more engaged we'll be. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room for most creators. Let's talk about her catchphrase. Now, I'm not about to tell creators how to create their OCs, but a catchphrase is something that's starting to get very overused. Nearly every OC created nowadays in the creepypasta fandom has a catchphrase, and it's usually uncreative or a close ripoff to a canon character's catchphrase. Like, we already have Nina the Killer saying, "Go to sleep, my sweet prince," and Jane the Killer with "Don't go to sleep," and I'm sad to say the trend continues here. Granted, if you want your OC to have a catchphrase, I won't stop you, but you need to be original, and Velmer's catchphrase is just another variation of Jeff the Killer's "Go to sleep." At just one word off, Velmer's catchphrase is, "Go to bed." Not only is it clearly a ripoff of Jeff's "Go to sleep," it also doesn't make much sense. If you're killing someone, you'd want the last thing they'd ever hear to frighten or intimidate them, not make them think you're their mother scolding them for staying up too late on a school night. Sorry to say it, Velmer, but on the character scale, I'm going to have to rate you as not a Mary Sue, but a pairing Sue. Now that we've talked about the character plenty, let's talk a bit about the creator. The creator's DA page claims that she's a 20-year-old from China, so we can assume English isn't her first language. Therefore, I won't go over the obvious grammatical errors in both her comments and her story, as I'm going to assume English is not her first language, and it's hard enough that I know Americans who can't even get a grip on the English language, so I'm going to just completely skip over that. After reading through the comments of her art though, it's come to my attention that this artist is rather closed off to criticism, and is lashing out like an overactive 12-year-old who's upset that nobody likes her OC. She's repeatedly called people racist, retards, bullies, cunts, and a slew of other horrible things for trying to offer constructive criticism or offering to help her rework her OC, often turning them away by telling them to shut up or fuck off, or even making a journal entry saying that people are just jealous she has the greatest OC of all time and that they should just fuck off already. In short, she's a horrible bully herself who lashes out at people if they have anything negative to say at all, and doesn't want to hear anything except people singing her OC's praises, which is an unrealistic expectation when you have a character that's a pairing Sue. Okay, I saved this point for the very last, simply because I have the most to say about it. Let's talk about the art. It's obvious to anyone looking at the art that she uses bases and MS Paint to create an OC, which is fine. I have nothing against people who do use bases. Some people use them because they didn't have the experience to get that one pose right yet. Some use them because they don't have paper or a working scanner but simply wanted to create some art, so turn to a base for some aid or inspiration. Or maybe you use a base as a preliminary layout so you can get an idea of what your character should look like, before handing it off to an artist who can draw it better than you can, so they don't have to go in blind. No matter why you use a base, there's no shame in it, as long as you credit the original base maker, as under copyright laws, that base does still legally belong to them. And if you don't credit them or at least acknowledge that you use a base, you are committing art theft under the current laws in place to protect artists and their work. This girl, however, has repeatedly stated in her comments that the bases were hers, and that everything there was her own original work. So, I decided to check out her claims personally. I gave her the benefit of the doubt and figured, okay, perhaps those bases could be hers and she simply has another account. So, I began looking for the bases she used. I found 4 of them and quickly realized there is no way that my theory could be correct, as all 4 of the bases she used were made by different creators, if you look at the screen names on the screenshots I took of the bases. 4 different names. And it seems like a bit of a stretch that she would have 5 or more different accounts to create bases, then troll us all with this OC. So we can clearly see she's a liar. All that was proven was this creator steals bases and tries to claim them as her own. So, base creators, I'd be worried about this artist.